Now, if you were one of the millions of people who tried to get Oasis tickets recently, only to see some prices double over the course of the day, look away now, because there was outrage this past week over Aston Villa's price hike for Champions League fixtures. If we look at some of these figures, Stefan, £85 to £97 some of these tickets were costing for Villa supporters. Season ticket holders were discounted at between £70 and £82. But if you compare that to Newcastle a couple of seasons ago, and I think that's probably the fairest way to do it, their prices were between £30 and £55 last season for home games. I'm a Newcastle fan. I went to one of these games against Borussia Dortmund. Brilliant experience, but it felt like a fair price at the time. So what do you make of these price hikes for Aston Villa?
Look, I think we've got an issue with ticket prices that are coming across from all live events. So if you look at what's happening in music, I mean, you mentioned Oasis before. If you look at, I think a standing ticket for one of the Oasis gigs is £150. We know that the prices for the Taylor Swift gigs were enormous as well. I know people would fly over from the US to, including the flight, because it was cheaper to watch her here. We've got inflation on live performance coming over from the US, and it's something we are going to have to deal with and get used to. It's not really, I know Villa are suggesting that it's a new thing, but the prices that have been charged in the London clubs have been very, very similar to those Aston Villa prices for Champions League. The prices that are being paid around Europe, if you were to have a look at Bayern Munich's Category A tickets, they range broadly from there are some standing seats in the standing tickets in the corners and behind the goal that are cheap, but the majority of those seats are over 100 euros. Some of them are 120 euros. If you were to look at the ticket prices for Milan for the Liverpool game, they go as far as 350 euros for some of those tickets. Almost all of them are over 100 euros. So it's not a new thing. I mean, I think
I guess some fans will listen to that and say, well, understandably, they are very high prices, but this is Aston Villa's first time back in the Champions League for a very long time, whereas they're quite long-standing clubs, both Milan and Bayern Munich. Would that be fair?
Well, it would, but you know, we know that Villa have invested a huge amount of money to get themselves into this position, and we know that they had severe PSR issues in terms of what happened before 30th of June. So I don't think it's a surprise that they have to look at every line of revenue and seek to maximise it. Now, of course, as fans, we hate it. And, you know, it's not just a Champions League issue. It's not just a London club issue. It's not just a Villa issue. I mean, I paid for my own ticket for City against Arsenal next week. Is an £87 ticket. It's not a hospitality ticket, or there's no additional drinks or anything with it. That is what a seat costs now to watch Premier events, including Premier League football and Champions League football. Unfortunately, it probably is the reality. I suspect, and again, people are not going to like it, fans are not going to like it, and I don't like it, but I suspect that the Aston Villa owners are thinking that they don't understand the fuss. You know, they're American owners, and they're probably looking at it and thinking, you know, why is there such uproar? This is a massive game for the club, and therefore, of course, it's going to cost a lot of money.
Steve, as a former CEO, do you go along with that actually, because of the status of this game, if you like, that this has been a fair price rise for fans?
Ticket pricing is one of your most complex issues that you have to deal with as a CEO. You have to remember the fan base is there, why they're there. They're back to all those years, and without those people, what are you? But at the same time, you have the dynamic coming the other way, which, you know, the PSR, and exactly as Stefan says, the owners have invested substantial sums of money. Millwall losing £10 million. The only way of getting that back is to put the ticket prices up, but you can't, because you put those prices up, you'd have no fans left. Every year, when you look at ticket pricing, you know, I used to go to boards, and across all three clubs I've worked at, that paper you put to the board and explaining, and they're saying, we'll put the prices up because we've got a massive hole. But actually putting the prices up in an EFL perspective, if you're not sold out, doesn't mean the revenues go up. You're putting the ticket price up, but the revenues actually can go down because of that. in Villa's scenario, they clearly have more demand than they have supply. The owners are putting a lot of money in. From a business perspective, you can understand what they do. I think where it gets to those scenarios, what they need to do is to communicate with the fans clearly. And I haven't looked at what they've done with the fans, so I'm being a bit judgmental here, unfairly maybe. But look at how you communicate with the fans. Look at how you're talking to the fans, and explain these issues to the fans, because they're there for everyone to see. And PSR is as we've discussed for a long time today, it's a big topic. And the last thing the fans would want is for Villa to be failing on PSR. And sometimes you have to play your part in this.
Do you think, though, with some clubs that the line is blurred a bit when it comes to making money and when it comes to almost the right moral decision in terms of letting the fans pay a reasonable price?
It's a really difficult balancing act between those two. And I'm fortunate, I suppose, in the clubs I've worked for, that actually having the fans fully on side and that togetherness, which again we spoke about earlier, was absolutely critical. And unfortunately, I wasn't in a scenario where every week we're sold out. So I didn't have the luxury of being able to then start to put prices up in those situations. I can get what Villa have done, but I just, you have to feel for the fans. But how do you balance that off between the two of the club failing financially and the money the owners are putting in versus how far the fans' wallets can afford to go, and at what point does their support break? And they're not customers, they're fans, and that is a really important piece to remember.
Stefan, if we just go back to that Oasis situation, did you get tickets, by the way?
No.
Oh, bad luck. Me neither. But if we go back to that situation, because a lot of the criticism towards that has been this dynamic pricing model where the cost changes depending on the demand. It's had a lot of scrutiny since the tickets for those gigs came out, but it could be on its way into football as well. I believe Valencia have become one of the first clubs to implement this kind of model. Do you think that would be something that clubs will look at and think, right, this is something we need to jump on now, or will they actually take the view? It seems that Steve's got here that actually they need to maintain that fairness towards fans.
Yeah, look, you've always got to balance supply and demand and the fairness to the fans, and also having the system work properly. I think Oasis, the issue on the Oasis tickets was the way that it was done and the expectation that people had. They queued all day, and then all of a sudden it's a 3x ticket price. Nobody is ever going to accept that as a customer. I mean, they may pay the money, but they're never going to be happy with that scenario. We have dynamic pricing in all sorts of industries that we accept. I mean, we accept it on an EasyJet flight or a Ryanair flight, or other ticket prices. We actually accept it in football. If you buy a season ticket, you're effectively involved in dynamic pricing because you're paying a lower amount for that early commitment of the cash and also of the number of games that you're going to take. So in itself, it's not, you can't rule it out, but the system would have to be run properly. And I think really it has to be framed the other way round, in that it would be rewarding those people that commit earlier. So if it's a game outside of the Premier League or at a club that has many, many seats available, if you're going to commit to buy a ticket early on and not wait to see how the team's doing at a particular time in the future, then you should be rewarded with a discount. And so it's kind of dynamic pricing, but in reverse. But look, these things are coming particularly to the Premier League, largely because a demand is outstretching supply. And when that happens, then we know that economics says the prices will go up. And that's where we are. It's really just a case of what format it looks like, as opposed to whether it's going to happen. We are going to have inflation in prices. And it is important to remember that almost all clubs at an operating level are losing money. So this is not a case where clubs are profiteering. They're loss-making. Most of the clubs are loss-making at an operating level before they start selling players and doing things of that nature, selling hotels if you're Chelsea and lucky enough to have a hotel to sell. So, we do have to remember that the clubs are getting a lot of owner funding right now. And so we can expect prices to continue to rise, unfortunately.
Steve, what would your take be on dynamic pricing in football? Do you go along with what Stefan's saying there?
Yeah, it exists in football. To what level it exists? Within the EFL, tickets on a match day are more expensive than before. Now that's communicated to fans, and they have that decision to be able to buy earlier. Um, the higher category games, so in the Championship, Leeds will be priced higher than when you're playing a Rotherham, for example. And no disrespect to Rotherham, but the Leeds is a more attractive game. The demand for the tickets is higher, so the tickets are higher. So it does actually already exist there. And if you're going to go to the extreme of the Ticketmaster and the Oasis, if you're trying to buy an Oasis ticket, and I tried and failed as well, and I think I even failed in the lottery afterwards. If you knew at the beginning that you could have been subject to huge dynamic pricing when you got there, maybe it wouldn't have been so painful. And I suspect that everyone would have still bought their ticket. But it's more the fact that it was a shock when they got there that allowed this to become a story, because it wasn't communicated properly. Football's clear in its dynamic pricing that exists at the moment. Your season ticket normally is cheaper. Your ticket, if you buy it early, normally is cheaper. Your ticket for the higher category game will be more expensive. It exists. When you buy an airline ticket, you go on the website, it's there, it's clear. It doesn't move between clicking, I'm going to go on that flight, to then going to checkout. And I believe that's the issue here, that actually it was done to an extreme level that created discomfort. So I think it's inevitable in football that it will happen. I think as Stefan says, they are loss-making businesses. So I think clubs should use dynamic pricing in an appropriate manner, well communicated. And let's be honest, dynamic pricing means that if there's still tickets left, the price should go down as well. So as long as it's fair, then I think it can be properly communicated and done in a reasonable way that is fair to fans.
Steve, do you think that if we talk about the overall cost of football at the moment, which has inflated over the years, whether that's been ticket prices or maybe the price of a football shirt and other elements such as that, do you think that some clubs need to take a bit of a responsibility in terms of the financial situations of some of their most loyal fans and to make sure that football isn't pricing them out?
Yes. Look, clearly the fans are... In my thinking throughout my time within EFL clubs, the fans are very high in your thinking. But the owners are critical. Going to the owner every month and asking for £1 million or £2 million is not an easy conversation, I assure you. However, unfortunately, you have to do it. And then having had that conversation and saying, oh, by the way, we're going to freeze ticket prices, that's an uncomfortable place to be as a CEO. So you have to have rationales on what you're doing, and it has to be about aligning everyone. It comes back to that point from earlier. If you're aligned from the chairman down, and that includes the fan base and the way you communicate with the fan base, then actually, if you all understand what you're doing, you're all in it together, then you find ways of doing that and sharing the pain amongst you.
Stefan, just finally, what about a ticket price cap? Would that be something that football should look to bring in? I mean, we've seen it with away games for the Premier League, and that seems to have been a very popular and a very good one to have brought in. Is it even a regulator that could come in to sort all this kind of thing out?
Well, look, the away ticket pricing works brilliantly for fans. I mean, there's no question. It makes, particularly when you go to some of those London games, even more enjoyable. Paying £30 at Chelsea when you're literally sat two seats down from a home fan that's probably paying 3x, maybe even more. It is great, but I suspect it's not sustainable for most clubs to accept a cap on tickets. It would remove a big chunk of revenue for some of the clubs, particularly the London-based clubs. I think would fight very hard to prevent that. So I think we should take what we've got in terms of the away fan ticket caps. I think they work well. And I would allow supply and demand to dictate what's paid for home fans. And also, just, I think, as Steve says, there has to be some trust that the boards as custodians of these clubs are mindful of the importance of the fan. It's just not the case that people are going around trying to profiteer from their fans. All the clubs understand the importance of the fan. And where they can, I think, they will offer, good value ticketing. And I don't think it's something that government or regulation should interfere with. And I think if it did, we would have quite a significant issue just from the viability of another thing in terms of the viability of clubs.